Shalom, this is Levi Shore. Welcome back to Swing Good Torah. So if you've been watching the events and the current Israeli-Arab conflict, you may be asking yourself, when did all this start? Did it start October 7th? Did it start 1948? We're going to see today that this has actually been going on for 4,000 years, and we're going to look at the very beginning of it all, and it's going to help us understand what's going on today. But what's even more incredible with watching events that are happening right now is that Hashem actually promised Avraham, he promised Abraham, the land of Israel in the year 2023. All right, what does that mean? How's that possible? All right, stay tuned and we'll discover it all. So the Torah begins with Bereshis Baro Elokim Es HaShamayim Ve'es HaAretz. In the beginning, Elokim, the aspect of Hashem, of God, he created the heavens and the earth. Now it's interesting. Rashi, who's a famous medieval commentator on the Torah, he begins the Torah, and his very first comment on the Torah is he's like, why did the Torah start by saying that Hashem created the heavens and the earth? And his answer is very fascinating. And he said that if the nations of the world say to Israel, Listim hatem, that you are thieves, for you conquered the lands of the seven nations. Who are the seven nations? The seven Canaanite nations. It says, Israel will say to them, the whole earth belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The whole earth belongs to the Holy One, blessed be He, to Hashem. He created it, and He gave it to the one found proper in His eyes. So we're going to see something really incredible. So in Parsha Lecha, there's actually a machlokas of when the bris bein habasarim happened. So what does that mean? It means the covenant between the parts. And it's the very famous covenant that's spoken about all the time, that Hashem, who's Hashem? Hashem means the name. And it stands for the very holy name of God, Yud He Vav He. And we just say, instead of pronouncing the name, when we're not in prayer or not in study, we say Hashem. And it means a God, it means the infinite being that's created everything. Did Abraham make the covenant when he was 70 or when he was 75? So Abraham was born on the Hebrew calendar from the creation of the world, 1948, which is very interesting. And we see in the modern world, in our current Roman exile, the year 1948, something miraculous happened. Just a scant few years after the Holocaust, millions of Jews came back to the land of Israel and fought a war to remain on the land against many Arab nations. And we saw a miraculous victory in 1948. So then, when Avraham was either 70, which would be the year 2018, but it really seems with the current events that the bris may have happened in the year 2023 of the Hebrew calendar, when Avraham was 75. So what happens is, it says in the Torah, it says, Vayomer Hashem Elokim, Bama Eda Ki Irashena. So it says, if you want to look it up yourself, it's Parsha Lecha, it's Genesis, let's say it would be 15:8. And what the pasuk says is, it says, He said, my Lord, Hashem Elokim, how will I know that I am to inherit it? Abraham was asking that right now he saw that the land was not empty. He saw those mighty nations inside the land, and he was asking how he knew he would inherit it, and then how he knew that his children would be able to inherit it. So then it goes on and says, on that day Hashem made a covenant with Avraham, saying. So at first, Avram, or Abraham, his original name was Avram. And then we'll see later Hashem changes his name to Avraham. So he said, Hashem says, to your children have I given this land, from the river of Egypt, meaning the Nile River, the delta region of the Nile was called the land of Goshen, to the great river, the Euphrates River. And if you want to look this up, it's at Genesis 15:18. So here the initial promise to Abraham was from the Goshen area where the Jews lived when we were slaves in Egypt. And that land was actually given to Sarah in Parsha Lecha. It's fascinating. When Sarah was kidnapped, was brought to the palace of the Pharaoh, that after Hashem inflicted the Paro and his family with a plague, and he releases Sarah back to Abraham, and he gives them many gifts. One of them he gives his daughter, the princess Hagar, the princess of Egypt, and when he was trying to, marry Sarah, he offered her the land of Goshen, which was later given again by a later pharaoh, to Yosef and his brothers and to Yaakov. We'll see later in the Torah when we get to that. So then the Torah continues, and Hashem says, "Vatomer Sarai el Avraham." Oh, okay. So let me jump ahead a little bit. So now, what's fascinating in Parsha Lecha, we actually once again see the birth of Hamas. So before the flood in Parsha Noach, we see that the Torah says that the world was filled with Hamas, and Hashem wanted to destroy the world because of it. So what does Hamas mean? So the Mefarshim, the commentators, say it means a couple things. Rashi said Gezel. There's other commentators that say it's actually violence, or it's stealing by force. And there's one opinion that Hamas is all these things. It's violence, it's stealing by force, it's physical immorality, all the forms of physical immorality that Hashem hates. It's avodah zarah, it's the false worship of anything except Hashem. And Hamas is all these things. And unfortunately, on that day, October 7th, which was Simchas Torah in Shabbos in the land of Israel, we saw Hamas perpetrate all these horrible atrocities. But then Sarah, after 10 years of marriage to Avraham, and Hashem changes their names from Sarai to Sarah and Avram to Avraham, which eventually will stand for Av Hamon Goim, that Avraham will be the father of many nations. And so Sarah, in this selfless, self-sacrificing gesture, gives Hagar, the princess of Egypt, who is her maidservant, gives her to Abraham as a wife, in the hope that this would spark rachamim, it would spark mercy from Hashem, and Hashem would give Abraham and Sarah a child. But Sarah was mad because then, when Hagar becomes pregnant, Hagar starts treating Sarah like horrible. She starts disparaging her and calling her barren and just horrible things about her, and treating her not as you should be treating a queen, but as you treat just a lowly person, a disparaged person. And she complains to Abraham that you prayed for yourself after my great gesture to you. You didn't pray for that both of us should have a child. You prayed that only you would have a child, and only Hagar is pregnant. And so she says, "Vatomer Sarai el Avram, Chamasi, it is my Hamas, Lecha, upon you. Ani nasati shivchasi b'chekecha." So what the pasuk says is, so Sarai said to Avram, "My injustice, my violence is upon you. I gave my maidservant into your bosom." And the rest of the pasuk continues, "And she saw that she had conceived. I became lighter in her eyes. Let Hashem judge between me and you." And that's in Genesis 16:5. So it's so fascinating. So here in Parsha Lecha, we see that Sarah actually says that Abraham, by not praying for Sarah to have a child, created this Hamas, which is very fascinating. Now that child that Hagar has a miscarriage, and she runs away to the desert, and then a malach appears to her, an angel appears to her, and tells her to go back, and that she will have another child named Yishmael. So then the Torah goes on to describe Yishmael. And Yishmael is fascinating because Yishmael is one of the, it says this a couple times, it's one of the few people in the Torah where it doesn't actually say who named the person. It just says like he, will be called Yishmael, and it doesn't say who said it. It also says that I think about Levi, and it's fascinating because a lot of the Mefarshim say that this is Hashem himself that's given these special children and their special role in the world, is given them the name themselves. So Yishmael means like God will hear. And one of the aspects is God will hear the cries of the Jewish people in the future from the atrocities that Yishmael's children perpetrate. And then Hashem will remember and have mercy on us. But here the Torah says, it describes Yishmael, and it says, "V'hu yeh pera adam, yado b'kol v'yad kol bo, v'al pnei kol echav yishkom." So it says, and he will be a wild donkey of a man, his hand in everything, and everyone's hand against him. And over all his brothers will he dwell. So that's in Genesis 16:12. So the Ibn Ezra, his commentary on this is that at first, so especially the part of like Adam Yado Bakol, I'm sorry, Yado Bakol V'Yad Kol Bo. So it means like his hand with everyone, and then the hand of everyone with him. So the Ibn Ezra says at first his children will be victorious against all people, but ultimately everyone's hand, they will conquer him, the Ibn Ezra. So what he's saying here is when Muhammad started, the religion of Islam, there was this idea of jihad, that they would spread this religion throughout the world. And then him and his immediate followers, it was like lightning. They struck all throughout the Middle East and conquered everything, and conquered all the way to the doorsteps of Europe. And then there was like fierce battles between the Europeans and Islam at the beginning. So Jerusalem itself was conquered in the jihad in 638 by Umar ibn al-Khattab, and then the Dome of the Rock was built in 691 by Abd al-Malik. So if we go by the original conquest of Jerusalem, it's fascinating because it says in the Zohar that in the merit of Yishmael getting a bris milah, getting a circumcision, as we'll see in next week's Parsha, it's the end of Lecha. When he was 13, he gets the bris milah, he gets the circumcision. But because his bris milah, because it was empty, meaning because Yishmael didn't follow in the ways of Avraham, he didn't follow Avraham by keeping the Torah and spreading the word of Hashem, and it was like an empty covenant because he didn't actually follow the part of the covenant which is keeping the Torah and spreading the Torah and spreading the knowledge of Hashem throughout the world. And we see then when we see with the invent of Islam, not only is the children of Yishmael not following the Torah, they create their own Torah. They create the Quran, or they create their own Torah to do what they want to do, but not following Hashem's Torah. So it says that the Zohar says that for 1,300 years, 100 years for each year that Yishmael was when he got the bris milah, because he did do this great thing, because he did this great mitzvah, when the land would be empty of the Jews during the exile, that Yishmael would reign over the land of Israel. Yishmael would be given the land for these 1,300 years. So if it began in 638, then 1,300 years, if I've done my math correctly, would be, I think, 1938. And then the end of the Ottoman Empire was in 1922 to the British Empire at the end of World War I. The Ottoman Empire, now Turkey, I believe they were Muslim, and they lose control of the land of Israel. So it's a couple years early. So they lost a couple years, or maybe they conquered a couple years early. But we see miraculously exactly what the Zohar says, that for these 1,300 years, that Yishmael actually did rule the land of Israel. But now we see, as the Ibn Ezra says, at first that their conquest, were great. And besides maybe little crusades here and there, they've controlled the land the whole time. And then in the modern era, now we see the Western powers. Now we see the children of Noach's other sons, of Japheth, and then the sons of Esav, sons of Edom, like the Roman Empire and the British Empire. We see other empires then, when I mean Roman Empire, I mean the modern, powers, the modern Western powers, start to defeat Yishmael in the Middle East now. So the Radak says that the meaning of the pasuk of Yishmael is that he will be a plunderer. He will be a caravan thief. And I think Muhammad himself, as the jihad began, they began raiding like caravans all throughout the Middle East. The Ramban, he says his descendants who will war with everyone. Now, Onkelos says something fascinating. Onkelos takes a different approach. Besides this aspect of jihad, he says it means it's the economic balance of the power. His hand, against others and others' hands against him. So the Chizkuni, he says that if we look at the modern world, the Arab states are dependent upon other nations for technology, but other nations are dependent upon them for their vast oil wealth. And as a result of their wealth, they have acquired vast holdings throughout the world. So what are the claims? What are the claims of the Palestinians, and who are the Palestinians? So what's fascinating is they are in essence just children of Ishmael. So logically their claim could be, well, Avraham, his firstborn son, was Ishmael, and then his second-born son was Yitzchak. So it's strange that they don't make that argument. But the argument they're trying to make is that the ancient Pelishtim, often translated as the Philistines, now the Canaanites, and the Pelishtim, if we look at Parsha Noach, and we see the three sons of Noach. So his first son, Shem, who we'll eventually see that the Jewish people are descended from. So Shem's descendants become the Asian nations. So Shem was given the Middle East, and he was given Asia. So we see all the Asian nations, and then the nations, found the Jewish people, the children of Ishmael, the Arab people, and then Edom, the children of Esau, who then goes on to, his children originally lived on Mount Seir, southern Jordan, where Petra is, and then they migrated up eventually to Italy and started the Roman Empire. So we see Esau's children. So then the next son, Japheth, Noach assigned to him Europe. So Japheth, descended from him, are the European nations. And then we see that also Edom, Esau goes up there, and his children eventually go to Europe. And then eventually all this is going to, everyone's going to go eastward and westward. And then the African nations were descended from Noach's third son, Ham. So the Canaanites, and the Pelishtim, and it's interesting, the Pelishtim are actually, in Parsha Noach, it tells us the 70 nations that are fully descended from Noach, his children and the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, that form the 70 core nations of the world. So we see the Canaanites, and the Pelishtim are descended from Ham. So they were originally from the African nations that came up. Now what's fascinating is I didn't really realize this until learning Parsha Lecha again, but it says in Parsha, so it's Genesis 12:6. It makes a comment when Avraham first comes into the land, what's called Eretz Canaan at that time. So there's a king named Melchizedek. And Rashi tells us that Melchizedek is actually Shem himself. It's Noach's son Shem. And he was acting as a Kohen in what city at that time was called Shalem, which becomes the city of Yerushalayim. So Melchizedek, or as Rashi tells us, Shem himself, the son of Noach, he was king. So what's fascinating is that we learn that Noach, when he divided up the world between his sons, he assigned that land to his son Shem. And so the land of Israel was originally designated for Shem, and then, as we'll see later, Hashem's going to promise it to Avraham, who is a descendant from Shem. So, and Shem, what does Shem mean? It's not English, Shem. It means the name. Just like we said Hashem, it means the name. So Shem means name. And why is that his name that? Because he was given a portion of the world where eventually Hashem will let his name rest on the Har Habayis, in the Beis HaMikdash, in the temple. Okay, so Rashi says on this, V'hakanani az ba'aretz, and the Canaanite was then in the land. Rashi explains that the Canaanites were then engaged in warfare, seizing the land from Shem's children, to whom it had originally been allotted when Noach divided the earth among his sons. All right, fascinating. Okay, so the Yishmaelim, who are calling themselves the Palestinians in Israel, so the original Rashi in the Torah is making the claim that the nations of the world will accuse us of stealing the land from the 7 Canaanite nations. Now, what's also fascinating is there's seven major Palestinian terrorist groups right now. I believe on a spiritual level, when we start talking about the forces on the Kabbalah level, of the forces of the Sitra Kedusha, the forces of the sides of holiness, and the Sitra Akra, the forces of the sides, the other side, the sides of darkness, that on the sides of spiritual impurity, these 7 terrorist groups represent the spiritual form of the 7 Canaanite nations. So it's the same battle in the modern world. But they don't claim, oh, we're descendants of Ishmael, we're the firstborn son. But they say, oh, well, you know, they claim to be the ancient police team, the ancient, Philistines. But from Parsha Lecha, we learned that not only, even if they would claim that, and they aren't even really that, it's just this facade. But even if they're really that, it was Shem who was there first. And then the Canaani were actually the invaders, because they were allotted the lands in Africa, and they came up into, a land that wasn't their own. And when Avraham was coming in, they were invading. So it became Eretz Canaan at the time Avraham came into the land, and the Canaani themselves were invaders, because it originally was designated for Shem and his descendants, his children, which would eventually become Avraham. Right, so then we see, so what's the actual promise? So after the Bris Bein HaBesarim, after Avraham asked the question, how do I know my children will inherit? How do I know I will inherit the land? So we see this passing. It says, Vayomer lo Elokim, Shimcha, oh, I'm sorry, let me go back, getting ahead of myself here. So then, where's the actual promise to Avraham? So the promise to Avraham was that when he made the Bris Bein HaBesarim, Hashem tells Avraham, take these animals, and I will pass like through in a pillar of fire with the Shekinah inside, my Shekinah inside, and I will promise to you that this land will be yours, and you will know that your children are going to have the merit, and what's going to build the merit? He's saying just offering the korbanos in the Beis HaMikdash, in the temples. But he says, but even when you don't have a temple, your children will still have tefillah. They have a prayer by doing the Shemona Esrei 3 times a day, by davening Shacharis and Mincha and Mariv and mentioning the korbanos in our davening. Hashem says, I will also fulfill that as the merit of actually if you brought offerings. That's the new avoda when you don't have a Beis HaMikdash. And then furthermore, what is going to give the Jewish people merit to inherit the land is the gullus, is the exiles. So originally he says, so the 400 years you'll be strangers until you're released from slavery in Egypt. Those 400 years is going to be the first of the exiles. And in Egypt contained all of the next of the 4 empires that would follow all throughout history. But then the Babylonian exile, the exile after the first temple of Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon's temple is destroyed by the Babylonians, by Nebuchadnezzar, and we're exiled to Bavel, modern-day Iraq. And then the exile of Paras, the Persian Empire. And then we're freed in the days of Mordechai and Esther from the genocidal Haman and Achashverosh. Not the first time Iran's tried to kill all the Jewish people. It's very ancient with them. And then, but Persia, Paras is also fascinating because they're also the builders. Because also in Paras was the great king Koresh, and then Esther's son Darius, King Darius. And both of them allowed the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, the second Beis HaMikdash. So Persia is fascinating. Both almost, our greatest destroyer, but also builders that allowed us to build the second temple. And then Yavan, then the empire of Greece. Now here the temple stands in the days of the Greek Empire. And Alexander the Great comes in and bows down to the wonder of his troops, bows down to Shimon Tzaddik and the outfit of the Kohen Gadol. And then our final exile, which we find ourselves in now, we find ourselves in 2023 years of the Roman exile, the exile of Edom. And in that very year is when Hashem promised us in this Bris Bein HaBesarim, when we made the covenant. He promised Avraham that in the year 2023, the Hebrew calendar, he promised your children will inherit the land. And we see these events, we see the events unfolding now. And this possibly could be the final events that lead to a series of events that leads to the end of this Roman exile and all the Jews eventually being able to come home, B'ezrat Hashem, the coming Mashiach. But then if they want to argue, okay, well, we give up on these Palestinian claims. Yitzhak was the firstborn. Yishmael was the firstborn. Yitzhak was not. He was the second son. So we have the claim. We have the rightful claim from Avraham. So Hashem clears it up. So we'll skip ahead a little bit. We'll go a couple parshas ahead into the future. And this pasuk here, where Hashem says, Ve'es ha'aretz asher nesati la'Avraham, leYitzhak, Lecha etnena, ulezar'acha acharecha etain es ha'aretz. And we see later that Hashem promises. And he says, the land that I gave to Avraham and to Yitzhak, I will give to you, and to your children after you, I will give the land. And if you want to look it up, Parsha Vayishlach, Genesis 35:12. It's the beginning of all this conflict. How is the land going to be won? Sometimes, unfortunately, there has to be fighting. To free the hostages right now, B'ezrat Hashem, we see a miraculous rescue of the hostages. But sometimes the land has to be fought for. But the land will only truly belong to those who really follow the ways of Avraham and Sarah, Abraham and Sarah. And it's their life of chesed and rachamim, their life of kindness and compassion, of bringing strangers into their tents and feeding them lavish meals, and only saying them, Vayikra b'shem Hashem, only saying, just thank Hashem. Thank the infinite Creator who's given us all this food, who's given us life. Just thank Hashem. And they showed Hashem, and they showed how He runs the world through their kindness. And that's the way, truly, the land will be inherited through the kindness of Avraham and Sarah. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you back again soon on Sweet and Good Torah.